So, good evening and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. So, I only met tonight's headliner half an hour ago, but William Least Heat Moon has been part of my life, indeed, a seminal influence on it for more than 30 years. As I'm sure is the case with most of you, I first became acquainted with Bill courtesy of his first book, Blue Highways, which originally came out in 1982. I was in my 20s then. Well, what's so funny about that? It was over 30 years ago. I was determined to lead a life of adventure, so I came here to the library. No. I wanted to follow a road less traveled. Certainly did that. Blue Highways spoke to that need, and it energized my wanderlust. For years thereafter, whenever, most of you know that this next statement doesn't make any sense. Whenever I was driving somewhere, actually whenever someone was driving me somewhere, my goal was to persuade whomever was behind the wheel to take a detour, try a side road, check out some town with an intriguing name like Sistersville or Pumpkin Corners. I have been to those places. Because, as every fan of Blue Highways knows, the journey does beat the destination, hands down. When I relocated to the Heartland 17 years ago this month, as it happens, someone gave me as a welcoming gift a copy of Bill's second big book, PrairyErth, about Chase County. It took me only a few months of living in Kansas for PrairyErth to begin to speak to me in phrases and insights that I've never forgotten. William has a line about the great Jeffersonian grid. That's his term for describing the graph paper-like system of section line roads implanted across the Sunflower State. The great Jeffersonian grid is an integral component of the routes I follow on my back road rambles across Kansas. William's description of Johnson County, full disclosure, that's where I live. It often pops up in my memory banks during one of my very infrequent visits to one of Johnson County's 8,000 shopping malls. In PrairyErth, he notes that Johnson County is known across the state as the home of the most spoiled brats in Kansas. And to cite just one other example, William's chapter in PrairyErth about the plane crash outside of Bizarre that killed Newt Rockney in 1931 is so beautifully written and hauntingly touching that I don't think anyone else needs to ever attempt to tell that particular story again. It's been done, cannot be improved upon. Try something else. And that's what Bill did in the years that followed with River Horse, Roads to Quoz, and several other books. But now he's returned to his roots, his original root, with his newest book published by the University of Missouri Press called Writing Blue Highways, the story of how a book happened. To get us in the appropriate mood to help us visualize some of the scenes Bill experienced, we're going to open tonight's program with a short presentation by Edgar Eller III, the principal of Eller Fine Art Photography in Columbia, Missouri, who, along with his son, Edward Eller IV, produced the lavishly illustrated Blue Highways Revisited in 2012, also published by the University of Missouri Press. It's more than a jaunt down memory lane. Instead, Blue Highways Revisited captures in glorious color the places and things and several of the people who populated the original Blue Highways. I should add that a portfolio of images from Blue Highways Revisited was accepted in 2001 as one of 100 worldwide photography projects for the Santa Fe Review, a prestigious juried review with participants from 13 countries and 23 states. So, quick interlude, Edgar Eller III and his Magic Picture Show.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Henry, and thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you, Heat Moon, for allowing me to precede you. This is William Least Heat Moon, a young professor at Stevens College who in 1978 found out on a winter's day that the following semester his position was no longer going to exist because the Stevens College population was shrinking at that time. So he said, there's no better time to do what I've dreamed of doing for some time and what many Americans would love to do, that is hit the road and see the back roads and the beauty of America. He did just that by leaving Columbia, heading east till he hit North Carolina's coast, then down through the south, back up, hitting the Oregon coast, across till he hit the Maine coast, then wandered down through New England, and eventually back to Columbia. It took him 89 days. I first read his book on a winter's night in January 1983. I knew when I got 3 or 4 chapters in that book that someday I was going to have to make this trip. At the time, I was only 3 years into my otolaryngology practice. And my wife was a second-year medical student. I had an 8-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. So it was a dream that was going to have to be delayed for a few years. But when I did retire from medicine in 2005, I met with Heat Moon about a year later at a cafe in downtown Columbia and showed him this picture and several others of part of his route of Blue Highways. And I suggested to Bill, hey, my son and I would like to photograph your route and produce a book, Blue Highways Revisited, that would allow people to compare our photographic images with your beautiful verbal images. I was surprised. He was very pleasantly surprised. He said, you know, one of the most common things people ask me is, when are you going to take the trip again and find out how things have changed? And he says, and I'm not going to take the trip again, so have at it. He would only tell me about 4 years later, when the book was about to be published, that he didn't think my son or I or anyone else for that matter would ever make that entire trip and actually make the book. So put on your seatbelts. It'll be a rather quick introduction to Blue Highways Revisited, but we're going to travel 13,889 miles fairly rapidly. You would think if you're traveling a route almost 3 decades after the original author wrote about it, that it would be very difficult to find the location of those pictures, but time and time again we'd go around a curve over the top of a hill, and there was a scene we knew Will wrote about some almost 3 decades prior. His writing is that descriptive. We also, of course, wanted to capture the 530 taverns, the mom and pop cafes. We also wanted to find the characters of his book, although many of them, if they were in their 60s or 70s, we knew were long gone, but we were able to find 11 of his characters still living almost 3 decades later. One of my favorite wide spots in the road was Nameless, Tennessee. You have to read Blue Highways again to tell how it got its name. When I went there, I knocked on all doors in the town, that's 5 or 6, except for one that had a very angry dog in the front yard. Found nobody at home. Fortunately, the old J.T. Watts General Merchandise store was still there. This is the picture Heat Moon took back in 1978 of the Watts family. Marilyn, on the far left, Aunt Marilyn, was the only living person still alive when I was able to track down Davis Watts, who was in college when Heat Moon went through. Fortunately, they were able to give me a tour of this store. It was interesting, when Marilyn first got out of her son's truck, she sat on the far right side of that bench, and I said, Marilyn, you know, the picture was taken with you on the left side. You think you could scoot down to the other end? And she was a little bit frail, and she gradually worked her way down. She said, you know, I'm the only person what's in that picture that's still alive, and I'm just about dead myself. Whoops, heading the wrong way. So going back in that store is like stepping back into a time machine. It is open about 3 weekends a year in the fall. and our book tells you what those weekends are. He, of course, continued east until he hit the North Carolina coast and turned southwest at that point. We're having to skip a few states. We're already now in Georgia. He was going through Conyers, Georgia, which is a little bit northeast of Atlanta, and he spotted this water tower with a cross on top. And he said, even in the Bible Belt, that was a little bit different. So he followed a magnolia-lined path, our road, up to what he found out to be the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. And here's where he met one of his key characters in the book. There are 23 photographs in his book and about 37 people in those. Not all of them were studied in the same depth, but this is one of the main characters, Brother Patrick Duffy. I can't tell you all the things, but in our book we can bring you up about 30 years as to what's happened with Patrick and the other characters that we were able to track down. But Patrick was quite a character, as you can tell from reading Heat Moon's book. When I tracked him down out in the San Jose Parish in New Mexico, where he had, after leaving the monastery, he became a priest. Patrick, I asked him, I said, what was it like being in Blue Highways? He said, to quote him, it was a pain in the ass. Said people kept coming to the monastery asking me, what's life all about? We've now traveled through Mississippi into Louisiana. On Highway 14 across southern Louisiana is where I found this old barn, and we're on our way to Texas. One of my other favorite towns was Dime Box, Texas. This is the barber shop in Dime Box, Texas. And in this window right over here, Claude Tyler, the barber, took Heat Moon out of his chair where he was paying $1.50 for his haircut and had him look out this window at a cottonwood tree. He said, that darn cottonwood tree has been sprouting underneath my building for the last 6 years. I cut it out every year and the darn thing keeps coming back and it's raising the side of the foundation. Unfortunately, Claude Tyler died before Will's book was published about 4 years later. But when I went through there almost 30 years later, that cottonwood tree was still growing out the side of that building. We're now in New Mexico. Heat Moon pointed out in this photograph that a hand-crank coffee mill helped kill off the Old West. What you can't see very easily unless you're up here is the barbed wire fence on either side of that highway. He says the barbed wire fence turned the cowboy into a feedlot attendant. We're now in Nevada. Another one of my favorite places, and one of the ones that changed probably the most. There were two places that changed the most in Blue Highways from our having made the trip 30 years later. One was Frenchman, Nevada. The other was the state of West Virginia. I'll tell you about that one in just a little bit. But Frenchman, Nevada had a population of 4 people. Lori Cheelander, the young lady, her mother-in-law, Margaret, her husband, Chris, and then their daughter, Callie. The town consisted of 2 buildings. The one building was one of the 530 taverns that Will visited, a cafe, a motel, and to the right of that was a little house that they called the gas station. So those 2 buildings, and behind it there was a fence. That fence separated their property from a naval bombing range. When I went through in 2007, I found a wide spot in the road, but Frenchman was gone. I mean, it was no longer there. So I sat there scratching my head thinking, how am I going to find the Cheelanders? And I began to hear this little whine. There was an engine someplace, and I realized it's above me. It's a drone. That makes sense. I'm right next to a naval bombing range. So I wanted to know I was a friendly target sitting there in my van, so I looked up and mouthed, I was in the Air Force. Only in retrospect did I realize that probably wasn't a very good thing because the Navy never looks very kindly at the Air Force when it comes to aircraft. But at any rate, just minutes later, they began to drop bombs not more than a mile away. And of course, they were duds, but they still produced a mushroom cloud. And they had sold in Frenchman T-shirts and hats that said, I got bombed at Frenchman and I joined the club. I was later able to track down Lori Cheelander, standing in the middle between 2 of her 3 daughters. I thought the scenery of 38 states, 13,899 miles would be the highlight, but getting to meet Heat Moon's characters 30 years later turned out to be the most interesting part of the whole trip. We've now gone through Northern California and we're all the way in southern Oregon. This, of course, is Crater Lake. Heat Moon told the story of Klamath Indians climbing down the scree or the wall of that crater, and if they survived getting to the bottom, they would bathe in that bitterly cold water. If you've read Heat Moon's book, Blue Highways, you know that every cold stream that he encountered in the United States, he jumped into to take his bath. I think, knowing his Osage heritage, that it was probably part of his DNA that made him do that. He fortunately made it to the Oregon coast. As he approached Oregon, the rains in Oregon, as well as the clouds of his own life, began to accumulate, and he almost had thoughts of turning around and heading back home. But fortunately, when he got to the Oregon coast, he was regenerated, re-energized, and if any of you have ever seen the Oregon coast, it energizes everyone. When he got to the north end of Oregon, he turned right, went to Portland, crossed over the Columbia River, and then proceeded north of the Columbia River in the state of Washington. This is Beacon Rock. It was significant, he pointed out, in that it was the first place that the Lewis and Clark expedition could measure tidal variations in the Columbia River, so they knew they were very close to the Pacific Ocean. We've gone all the way across the northern United States now and already in Vermont. This was one of my favorite images. Only about 100 yards behind me was a small cemetery immediately beside the road that I know had Civil War graves in it, but probably had Revolutionary War graves in it. All the facing was worn off of all of them. One of my favorite mom and pop cafes was the Wasp, located in Woodstock, Vermont. Heat Moon sat on this very first bench and listened to a conversation of two guys right beside him, and it was there that he learned that the one guy had saved his marriage by just changing his undershorts. He proceeded east until he hit the Maine coast and then headed south. This is the other place that had changed the most, and that was the state of West Virginia. When Heat Moon went through, if you've read his books, which I'm sure all of you have, he's very descriptive. He's also very honest, and he described the millions of spare tires and the hundreds of old rusted out cars along his route. So it wasn't a very pleasant picture of West Virginia that he painted in Blue Highways. So the Secretary of State of West Virginia wrote him and asked him never to come back. When I went through, fortunately, they had cleaned it up. It was pristine. If you're like me and you've loaned your first copy to your brother-in-law and never got it back, you can now find the 30th anniversary edition of William Lee Heat Moon's Blue Highways, and I hope you'll pick up a copy of Blue Highways to visit at the same time, because now you'll be able to compare his verbal imagery, which is fantastic, and our photographic images. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. Ed, may I close your laptop so if I knock this water over, it's...
Just shut her down. Put this up here so I won't be...
They told me that we were going to have this program at the old library. The old library to me is the one that is just east of here. Those of you who are over 70 years old will remember it. Henry said it's called the old library. And somebody else said, no, it's the old library. But it's the one, if you're an old timer and if you're ever in there, it's the one that had the skeleton of a whale in the basement, and you'd come in one of those doors and you went down and there was a partial skeleton of a whale. What a whale has to do with Kansas City, Missouri, I don't know, but it was there and certainly intrigued a 6 or 7 year old boy. My other story about that old library, and for this I'm deeply indebted to the Kansas City Public Library system, is that that's where I discovered books in volume. In that I went in, I looked at the shelves, these long lines of books and books and books. We had a number of books in our home out on 74th and Flora, but nothing like this. And I was overwhelmed. And I have a specific memory today, pushing 3/4 of a century, of finding Robinson Crusoe on one of those shelves. And if that were still a library and still shelved with books, I think I could take you to that place where that book was. It is so clear in my mind. And opening up Robinson Crusoe, and there's this page, and taking it home. It was a bit of a musty book, even then, I must say. I have to tell you one thing that has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. But it was in the Barnes & Noble here in town yesterday, and I went up to see if they had Writing Blue Highways there, and he said, "Who wrote that?" And I said, "William Lee Steepmoon." And the guy said, "No." I said, "I'm pretty sure that it's Steepmoon." He said, "No, that's not it." And I thought, I didn't want to reveal myself because I'm asking after my own book. I mean, that's so egotistical. So I thought, I'm stuck here. So I said, "Well, I'm really quite sure." He said, "No, that's not it." So he was fiddling there on the computer trying to bring it up, and he finally did. And he said, "Oh, yeah, it's by Heatmoon." Okay. It's nice to be known in your hometown. My wife, who is right here, Jan, and if you're interested, this is not the wife in Blue Highways, I'm sorry to say. But she is in Quoz. If you read Roads to Quoz, anybody read Roads to Quoz? Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. Well, if you've read Roads to Quoz, this is Q, and if you have your Quoz with you, she's brought her blue pen, and she will put her Q in your Roads to Quoz to sign it. At any rate, I had to look over my notes here, what I wanted to say, and she said, one after the other, she said, "You're not going to tell that story." "No, you're not going to tell that one too?" "Yes." So I went through, and I marked those. Unfortunately, those, I think, are the best stories. So I would have been a lot funnier tonight if she hadn't edited it. But I want you to know what it's like to live with an editor. She has her own book coming out next year, published by the University of Missouri Press, with also with a strong local interest. It's called, and I think I may tell the title now. It's called I want to call it the Unknown Travels, but somebody said, well, they're not unknown, but call them the Little Known Travels of William Clark. The Little Known Travels and Dubious Pursuits of William Clark. And what she's discovered about William Clark and the trip he took in 1798 from the Falls of the Ohio at Louisville on down to New Orleans and around the ocean and up to Delaware and back across to Kentucky. She's found things out about William Clark that is going to remake our understanding about who William Clark was, what kind of man he was, and what he did. This is not going to draw universal praise from those who are besotted with William Clark, but she's done her research, and it's there. It's going to remake things. At any rate, this is what it's like when you work with somebody who writes and who edits. So whenever I do this, can you see the light in the back there? You see that red light? Got it? That's where I had something I thought was pretty funny to tell you. And if we weren't such a big group, we could go aside and I could let those stories out. But maybe I can put them in a book. I can get by with more in a book than I can a public talk. But it's, I'm thinking this is such a handy little thing. I wish I'd had one of these years ago. And I thought, what if Mark Twain had had one of these? He was such a good speaker. He was such a good speaker that after a while he got so polished that he was putting people to sleep. He was just too smooth. And his wife Olivia said, you got to do something different. So I read. I wasn't there. He built in deliberate mistakes because people wake up when you make a mistake. And if that happened, I won't say if that happens tonight. When that happens tonight, I planned that. But I was saying about Mark Twain and technology, which reminded me of cell phones, of which Q and I do not have one. I think we're the last people in Boone County not to have one. I don't have a hostility to cell phones. I think they're really pretty neat, smartphones anyway. And I do have an iPad, so I know about apps, and I have some apps. And I think about apps, and Q and I have decided we need to come out with a certain number of Zap apps. And one of the ones I want to do is I have this app on my, if I had a phone or my iPad, I could hit it, go through the sequence, and it would disconnect somebody who was talking very loudly on a cell phone. I hate to say it, but those people, as you know, tend to be seniors such as myself. They still think that they're talking on one of the phones where you had the earpiece in your hand and the speaker up here. The other one I want is one that I can hit the app and I could change the volume on public televisions. So if you're waiting for your car in the shop and Fox News is up, I'm just picking something at random. Fox News is up there, you can hit your app and suddenly those people are... I'm sorry. I promised myself I would not in any way get political, but I had to tell you the truth. And the other one I want, this is the last one. I would like one that would silence public music. Muzak, we used to call it. So if you're in a restaurant and you're trying to have a conversation and this music is coming and it's not good music, even if it is good music, you can hit that and the speaker system goes blank. About our only really good bookstore left in Columbia now is Barnes & Noble, and it's not a very good Barnes & Noble, I must say. But one of the reasons it's not is that they play this music. I'm in there, I'm looking at books. I'm playing with words. I don't want this music. Certainly not the kind that they're playing. They call it music. I'll take their word for it. But if I could just hit my app and silence Barnes & Noble, then we can start talking about all those children who are over there at the games. Have you noticed how Barnes & Noble has become a seller of games more so than books? That's tough. Perhaps I should not return, but get to what I'm supposed to be talking about tonight. This is a very difficult book to talk about for me. That's that way for all my books. They say, what is your book about? And I never know how to answer that question. And I can't answer it very well tonight, other than to say that it's the hidden story, if that's the word, the hidden story behind the making of Blue Highways, yes, but it's also a kind of sequel to Blue Highways in that Blue Highways took 3 months. Three months, and writing the book took 4 years. So, but that writing the book was a continuation of the trip in many ways. It's a book, I think, it's not a how-to-write book. There is writerly advice in there, but it's more about how one deals with a creative effort. When somebody wants to make something, create something that has never been seen before. You're going to be faced with all sorts of problems, creative problems, psychological problems, emotional problems, financial problems. All those came up during the 4 years of trying to write Blue Highways. And I think that this book in that way can be an encouragement. It's the kind of book, maybe this is the way to say it, it's the kind of book that I wish I had at hand when I was trying to write Blue Highways. It would have saved me from, to use the cliche, from trying to reinvent fire. And especially among young people, but also about anybody of any age who's trying to make something that the world hasn't quite seen yet. Blue Highways, for better or for worse, changed the way a lot of people see America, both here and overseas. For reasons that I can't understand, it's a cult book in Italy. All of my books are available in Italy, and that's the only nation on earth outside of our own country in which that's true, but Italians really have taken to this. So they see, I think, in Blue Highways and other books by me, they see a different view of America than they get on the television or they get in movies. And I think Americans saw that too, especially in 1983 when the book first appeared. It changed some things. Well, an editor said when we were talking about writing Blue Highways, said, people may want to know this book that has changed some things, how it came about, because it's sort of studying the effect of an effect in a way. So I hope that's true. We'll see how it's going to do. It's only been out about 2 weeks, and this is the first public talk I've given about it. And as I say, I'm finding my way about what to say about it and what not to say about it. there's this beautiful woman in Meridian, Mississippi. Now I've got to find my segue here. We should have talked about this much earlier. This book is also a journey, too. It's of a different kind. I came home to Columbia, Missouri, where I was living at the time, in early June of 1978, and began trying to write the book. First, I had to find a job. I got a job in the Boone County Courthouse in the probate court, which appears a lot in this book because it had a lot to do with handling language. And I typed page 1 of Blue Highways. Notice I said typed. I'll get to that in a minute. Just by chance on July 4th. So it's sort of neat that a book about America would begin on July 4th. But even neater for me at the time was that I typed 12 pages. That's about 1,500 words. Never in my life have I ever typed 12 pages again in a day. But at that day I thought, oh yeah, man, I'm really rolling along. It never rolled along like that again. And I thought, I'll be through by Christmas. Little did I know that it would be that Christmas, another Christmas, and one last Christmas before the book would appear. What happens is that the trip, as I mentioned, 3 months, so that's it is actually about 100 days, almost exactly 100 days. The writing of the book took almost exactly 1,500 days. So we have a ratio here, of course, of 15 to 1, which means that for every day of the trip, it took me, on a pure mathematical average, it took me 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks to write about that one day. Now, what happens is this, and this would be one practical thing if any of you want to write, this might be of much use to you. I wish somebody had mentioned this long ago. The hardest thing in writing, and this must be true in any field of endeavor, any kind of invention, if I can use that word, the hardest thing is getting something out of nothing. And I tried to do this. I remember that when I decided I wanted to be a writer, I was, a freshman or an 8th grader at Southeast High School. I seen a picture of Ernest Hemingway, who was my hero as a writer then because he had a beard. And he, manly, later, came to have far more respect for William Faulkner, but William Faulkner was this little man and neat mustache and so on. He didn't click. As I got older, yes, his books changed me. But Hemingway at that time, yes, manly, fights the bulls. And I saw a picture of him standing at a mantelpiece. Mantles come up, like this. Hemingway was about 6'2", 4, 3, something like that. And he was standing there with a portable typewriter, typing. I thought, that's the way writers work. That's the way you do it. You get a small portable typewriter. And I knew he was, for a while, a correspondent. What a romantic term. What a neat thing to be, a correspondent. A foreign correspondent. I really liked it. So I thought, first thing, I got to get a portable typewriter. And many of you know that Hemingway started right here in Kansas City as a writer on the Star. So I thought, man, we got that connection too. Maybe I can get a job with the Star. I'm a local boy. I had it pretty well figured out. So for my 16th birthday, I got an Olympia portable. You remember the Olympia brand typewriters? Well, I still have mine. They're still solid things. I can't tell you the beatings that machine has taken. There's a photograph in here. In fact, in Ed's book, Ed, where'd Ed go? There you go. Don't you have a close-up of the broken piece of that Olympia typewriter? Yeah, I did that with a shoe. It didn't make that mistake again either. At any rate, so I thought that's the way you begin. So I got the typewriter for my 16th birthday, and it was in August. School hadn't started, and the next day I sat down and put in a piece of paper, and I'm going to write a story. Okay. And that went on for about 20 minutes, and I couldn't even come up with a title. I was going to try to spin this right out of my head at the time. Well, over a number of years, I can't tell you how long it took for me to figure this out, I realized that this problem of going from nothing to something has got to be attacked in a slow, easy way. So what finally happened is that I began doing this. This is the way my books begin. I have it with me, and if I'm traveling, whatever it is, whatever story I'm working on, pull out my pen, and if something happens I think might be useful, just make a quick notation. It's usually not a complete sentence, it's just something to remind me of what somebody said. If somebody uses a particularly good, rich phrase, which I think there are a number of those in Blue Highways, people use colorful language. Okay, I would get the key part of that phrase. So then the next day, already I no longer have nothing. I have something. I have something to work with. That's what you have to get the material so you can start chiseling. So then, it wasn't quite this smooth in Blue Highways. It became like this by the time I worked on the second book, PrairyErth. Then I started transferring the notes, because these are not legible beyond about 24 hours, and I can no longer read my handwriting, and I can't make the associations. So the next day, then I transfer them to a logbook like this, and upside down. This page is sort of the narrative of what happened. You see, it's pretty cohesive. But over here, I can put in anything I want. Side comments. Well, that's another trip. That's why it's blank. Diagrams. I draw in diagrams. Put in pictures, or a little sketch I drew on another piece of paper. That's a Mount Washington in New Hampshire. I'll fill up something. I've got some space to do some more drawings. I'll put. I hope this is interesting. I'll stick maps in there, which will help me remember where I was and what relationship this thing had to that thing. So, and this is one of two books. Another one just like it, which were the predecessors to Roads to Quoz. And if you can, somebody up here front can see it says right there, it says Mosey Log. I was going to call the book An American Mosey, but that got into the subtitle, and I moved the title to Roads to Quoz, but that's the way it began. So now, I really have something now. I mean, this is kind of heavy. So it's definitely not nothing. Maybe it's not any good, but it's not nothing. Sounds like I'm using bad grammar, doesn't it? That's not nothing. Is that a double negative? And then, where is it? Then I start what somebody might call the real writing. And I typically do that with a pencil. Not always, but usually. And we can talk about a pencil in just a minute. But I take this, reading from this and remembering what happened, looking for the phrases, and I start going as fast as I can roll with that pencil on the cheapest paper I can find, which here's a sample. This happens to be in ink. That's something I did just the other day. But I say usually it would be in pencil. But I just fly. I'm moving quickly. I can't go any faster on my laptop. I cannot go any faster. In fact, I can go faster this way, because if I find something, this is pretty clean. It usually doesn't look like this. Oh, that paragraph, that's terrible. That doesn't work. Just cross it out, turn it over, and write it here. If I start having to go back and eliminate with the laptop or something, that slows me down too much. Keys are slower. So from this, every book I've written exists as an entire handwritten manuscript to start with. And then until recently, I would go from pencil and go to ink and do an ink version. This, of course, takes time, but time is what writers need, I think, to try to make their work what they want it to be. And then I go to the type page. Now with Blue Highways, I had an electric typewriter, electric, not electronic, electric, I'm sorry, the portable. Eventually got to electric. So that meant sitting there, every letter, every bit space was a stroke, right? Now, and there is proof in this book that the manuscripts for Blue Highways, once they were complete, stood 1 meter high. There's a photograph in here of it. Well, no point showing you because you won't be able to see it back there, but there's a photograph, I hope it's proof. 1 meter high, about a meter. And it felt like that. It equaled about 2 million words. This is to get Blue Highways done. And I weighed it. It weighed 60 pounds. And that did not have every page I'd written, because sometimes, as I said, I'd be writing along and it was so bad. That's why I use cheap paper. It's quite therapeutic. I grab the paper and wad it up and throw it across the room. And, oh, that felt good now. Try again. So it wasn't every page, but the pages that remained are weighed 60 pounds. So here, the trick on it is that I realized that finally that Blue Highway's manuscript, the very first typed version, was 800 pages long. And I thought, nobody's going to publish a book by an unknown writer that is 800 pages long. I have to cut it down to something. So I arbitrarily started thinking like a five and dime store manager and said, okay, I'll make it $4.98. I got to get rid of 300 pages. So the first part went pretty easily because there was so much in there that wasn't very good. And there was a lot of material in there which was about me. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. So that came out very quickly. Then it got to the point where it was starting to get hard to cut things. So I began, the first thing I did was to measure how far I could push the margins right and left before they looked like this guy is pushing the margins. Exactly the opposite thing that my students at Stevens College used to do. I wanted to make 200 words look like 100. They wanted to make 100 look like 200. So I did that. But then what would happen, this, I just by chance have this there. I don't know whether you can see this, but, well, any chance in the back, can you see that there's a full line of type here? A little blur. Anyway, take my word for it. There's a full line of type here, but the next line, there are only 2 words there, and then maybe you can see that white space. That's, in printer's talk, it's called a widow. Well, that's a lot of wasted space. So I would type, let's say, this page. This happens to be from my new book. And that widow would appear. So, oh no. So I'd go back and I would cut 2 words. Sometimes it had to be a few more to make it work. So I could get rid of that widow. So then I'd gained a whole line, virtually. But what would happen is I would going through there, I'd find something else that should be cut. It wasn't very good. So I'd cut that and go back. No, I got a widow again. So sometimes I typed those pages 3 times. And again, I was using an electric typewriter then, not my portable. But each thing was a keystroke. So it took a long time. But what I learned from that, one is to buy a computer when they became available. And that's what I do now, I use my laptop, but only after I've gone through those other phases. And I appreciate so much being the computer generation because I'm such a heavy reviser. And that's what I want to say next is that Blue Highways and most of my books exist in 10 drafts, 10 different drafts. And then I keep revising. I just found in this book, in the printed version, if some of you pick it up today, there are several mistakes in there which will be corrected in the second printing. But I keep looking and finding things. I do stop after a while. Henry James, as I understand, never did stop. He kept revising his printed books for years and years. I quit after a couple of printings and say, it's human, what happens. But what I was learning from that process is something I now call, and I could never really get my students to believe this, my writing students, what I call layering. You go slowly, and you get a page done, and you look at it, and you think, oh, I need to add that. Oh, this. So that you slowly build things into your sentences, into your paragraphs, and the book becomes, I hope, I intend it to anyway, but I hope it becomes richer. And if you would compare the first paragraph of anything I've written with the 10th paragraph, you would see what I'm talking about, how different it is. It's the difference between, I hope, I would like to think it is, a difference between a drive-up meal and a smorgasbord or something. You have a sketch there and about what you need to get enough calories, but you go back and now you can add this and we got the smorgasbord going. That's layering. A priest, a rabbi, and a man dressed as a penguin walk into a bordello. I can't. No, I was in the Navy. No, I'm as Q will testify, my language sometimes colors the air more than need be. Okay, I'm kind of winding down here. And I hope we can go to some questions because that's my favorite part of these gigs. I'm really happy to begin this book, by the way, in Kansas City because I grew up here, and if I don't get a receptive audience here, I'm really in trouble for the rest of the country. When I was talking to, well, it was my editor, the editor of Roads to Quoz and Here, There, Elsewhere, my 2 last books at Little Brown. My editor's a good man, Jeff Chandler. I was telling him about this, and he liked this book very much, but the head man at Little Brown said it's too small. We don't want to publish a book that small. And believe me, we had to puff this up to make it even that thick. A lot of you will read this probably in an evening or a day, those of you who read faster than I do. In our conversation, he called this, and I really shouldn't tell this story because it'll probably come back to haunt me, but we're all Kansas Citians, so we can trust each other. He called this a memoir of a memoir. And I don't want to say I hit the ceiling, but I certainly said, what? Blue Highways is not a memoir. He said, oh yes, we could call it a memoir. I said, we can call it whatever you want. I can't control that, but it's not a memoir. He said, yes, I believe it is. I said, in that case then, the journals of Lewis and Clark are memoirs. Nobody's calling them memoirs, but if you're going to say that, that's what it is. I said, a memoir, the focus of memoir is about the writer. It's about the writer. The purpose of it is to tell the world your story. And that's what I was doing in that early version of Blue Highways. The one I told you where I had to get rid of the 300 pages. Most of those pages had to do with me. And it dawned on me after a while, one, I'm not that interested in it, so I don't know why other people would. But what I am interested in are those people that I met on the road, the ones that Ed showed you in his photographs. So those are the people, and they're the ones who carry the book. So when people speak of Blue Highways as a memoir, I really get defensive about it and correct them if I have the chance. This, however, maybe you could call a memoir. I'd like to think of it as autobiography, but I believe also that it's much more than that because it is a journey too. It's a journey into the mind. It takes the traveler who was anywhere from 3 weeks older than the traveler in here, depending on where you want to measure, to 4 years or more older than that traveler. But it's just bodily, it's pretty much the same traveler. And the route that he takes, however, is not the same route. There are no signs on this other route. There are no bridges. There are no paved roads. It's all up here, so you're spinning along. So the traveler is, and that, I would look at the photographs that appear in Blue Highways, look at those photographs. And I have a couple dozen of all those people, so I see them in many different aspects. Look at their faces, and that would help key my feeling toward them, and then I would try to express that. And that's where I began realizing that the book was made, the idea of the book was made primarily by 3 characters that I met along the road. The first one was, you saw his picture up there, was Patrick Duffy, the retired New York police officer who had gone to the Trappist Monastery in Conyers, Georgia. And he and I sat out in the woods talking that night. He's the first one. What he was saying, the things I needed to hear, because if you remember Blue Highways, I was still married, but was separated, and my whole life was falling apart. I couldn't get a job. I wrote 600 letters over 2 years applying for jobs, including about 3 different schools in the Kansas City area, including one where I'd formerly taught, Park College that was then. Nobody wanted me. I had to begin again. So Patrick was talking about those things. The second person was Kendrick Fritz, the Hopi, that I met in Utah, although he was from Arizona. And the third person, and this is when I start thinking that trip was directed by something more than me. I was raised Presbyterian, South Presbyterian Church out on Truce. I'm not a Christian anymore. I like to call myself a Zen Druid. Zen Druid. And I say that because nobody knows what it is, but it's the names, and it sounds sort of neat. Well, everybody likes Zen. Who dislikes Zen? We don't know what it is, maybe, but we like it. And Druid, no, Druids are right. They like trees. I like trees. I like Zen art. But in the book I just finished, which takes up questions like that. It's very much about belief and faith and truth. I call myself, and that's what I say now, I call myself a cosmotarian. That's a Presbyterian boy who wanted to be an astronomer but couldn't handle the math. But he understands that the universe is 14 billion years old. Basic concepts, which not every religion deals with those concepts. I mean, let's think about our key religions in America. Where did they come from? They came from a desert people who were living essentially in the Bronze Age. And their ideas, they had good brains. They simply didn't have the facts to work with those and interpret them. But I have to believe that if Moses were going up on the mountain today, the tablets he would come down with would maybe be very similar, but there might be something else in there which would actually connect with the way the world, the universe exists. So that was a bonus to your attendance tonight. And I probably should tell you the story about this guy I met in Scranton, and his wife. I'm on my last page here. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that if Blue Highways is understood to be a book about Heat Moon, about William Trogdon, then I failed. If that book is about me, I failed badly, and I wasted a whole lot of my life. I just can't bear to think that that's the way it gets read. Although I do know in some cases, yeah, that's it. I mean, if it's a memoir, then I failed. If my editor is right, it's a memoir, I failed. I think what I want to happen, and maybe I delude myself, but I believe happens, I want a two-part effect. I want the book, number one, to be about those people that I met, whose images you saw up there in Ed's photographs. I want the book to be about them because they're the ones who taught me. They're the ones who took my warped, twisted life. And I was no kid. I was 38 years old. Took this 38-year-old man and began talking to him, and I believe straightened him out so that he understood that the universe does not revolve around him. Sometimes not even his own life revolves around him. The second part two, then is I wanted to form a link from those 36 people who appear in Blue Highways in the photograph and many more just in mention. I want them in whatever way works to link with readers so that when you all read, if you do, Blue Highways, and there's a character that you especially like, that link between why you like her or him, that's the important thing, because what you're doing then, I hope, is that you are connecting with another human being. And everything that I have written since Blue Highways, more and more it's become obvious to me, a little slow to realize this, but obvious to me, that what I'm trying to get across in my writing, if I had to choose one word, it would be otherness. Otherness. To escape self, otherness. And that's why that part of my ancestry, even though it's small, that part of my ancestry which comes from the Osage, that's why, and traditionally when the Osage and most of the Plains Indians people prayed, and some of the Eastern tribes too, when they praised, they did this. They looked up, they opened their arms up. I mentioned this in Blue Highways. They did not bow their heads, they didn't daven, they didn't get on their knees, they stood up to reach out. And that, when I realized it as a boy, it was very important to me to look up and reach out, to get beyond self. And yes, for about 25 years I forgot that. And that's why I wrote the book, I suppose. Okay, I've just petered out here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, William, for these wonderful remarks. Thank you for choosing to make the Kansas City Public Library the first public venue where you would talk about writing Blue Highways.
Thanks, Robinson Crusoe.
M2. So we have a little bit of time for some questions, but this is a big room and there's a lot of people here and no one's going to hear you if you don't come up to the microphone. And by contractual arrangement with William Least Cheat Moon, he will not call on you. So I would like to ask anyone who wants to ask William Least Cheat Moon a question to come to this microphone and have at it. Thanks.
Did the journey help to heal your soul?
I'm sorry?
Did the journey help to heal your soul?
Heal?
Yeah.
I'm
Okay, I'm a psychotherapist.
I'm really glad we're starting with the questions I can answer. I struggle with that word soul because I'm not sure what it is, but why don't you give me your definition of soul? Maybe I can answer.
Your higher self.
Now I struggle with the word higher. And
All of what you were meant to be.
I don't know that either.
I can go back over there.
Well, the easy answer, of course, is yes, but I'm not sure. I really don't know.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It's an honest answer, not a good answer, but an honest one.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
Honest is good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Make this one that for sort of an idiot's delight question.
Yes. I just discovered that my computer will do dictation. Do you think you could write using dictation?
Can you hear in the back okay? Yes, sir. I suppose so. And I've looked into those what are they called? Speech to text? Dragon speech, those things. I've looked at those. I don't have one that can do that yet. But one thing I would have said if I hadn't been edited so much was the reason that I do with pencil, and I used to try to convince my students of this, especially after the laptops came into existence. Writing it's a very close motion to drawing. I also draw. And I think that motion is different from this. I think it requires a different part of the brain to do that. So I believe very much in that, and I doubt that I would ever go to speech. But if I did have a little recorder on the Blue Highways trip, but I had so little money that I couldn't afford the tapes. So it was a micro cassette, so you have that much. 12 minutes or something? It's filled up, and then I have to stop and go into a library and copy notes. And it was just slowing everything down, so I quit. And I took notes, but I lost a lot too. But I wonder what it would have been like if I could have talked as I was actually driving, let's say, across Montana. And I watch Ed work with his digital cameras, and he can put text in there with his pictures. There would have been so much more, which means that Blue Highways would have been even bigger manuscript and definitely unpublished. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Beware of thoughts that come in the night. I think the first line of Blue Highways is genius. And I just wonder if you'd talk a little bit about the importance of the first line of a book, or do you think it's important, or was it hard for you to come up with that line?
I did not pay this woman, but that that answer is in here.
Oh, great.
And
wonderful.
I like that you used the word genius, not only for its obvious effect, but that genius took 25 drafts to get out. And the first line in the Blue Highways Journal is in this book, and then there was a subsequent line. Maybe it's in there, maybe it isn't. But it was 25 versions of writing those opening 120 words, I think it is, of Blue Highways. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, it is genius. That genius took about 3.5 years to hatch. Yeah. And that's what I try to get across to my students. That's why you layer. That's why you keep going back, because if your brain is working, it adds too.
Do you think that the first sentence is more important, or has a real significance? I just think of a lot of novels with their great first lines. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think this line's right up there with them.
Yes, you're right.
Because we all... Well, we all have thoughts that come in the night.
What?
We all have thoughts that come in the night.
Oh, yeah.
And so immediately, I was with you on this journey.
I hadn't thought about it from that point of view. I'm glad it works that way, and yeah. But yes, I believe that books should open strongly, and that's why it took me 25 times. That's why it took 60 pounds of trees to get this book the way I wanted it. There's a book out now. I don't want to mention the title, but it's by a person who's written another excellent book. This book is a smash. It's selling big time. It's a big book. Some of you will know the book. Some of you have read it. All I want to tell you is that the first sentence of that book. Where'd you go? Oh. Things like that happen in my life now. I don't want to. Okay. The first sentence has 3 howling dangling modifiers in there. Now, this is not the worst error that a writer can make, but what it tells me is that this writer really isn't working hard on making this sentence, opening sentence work. And if you don't make the opening sentence work, what are you going to do with the rest of the sentences? So I checked through. I talk about this test I give books in here also. So I checked through it and another few passages and read them. And I thought, this just isn't well written. Maybe it's a great story. I don't know that. I'm never going to be able to read that book. I can't read dangling modifiers where what is one of them? The wind is walking down the street. And do you have them there? Somewhere. Okay. So while we pause, you want let me borrow, if I can.
I sat by the window, staring out at the canal.
My excellent wife here copied this down out of Barnes & Noble yesterday. I sat by the window, staring out at the canal. I didn't know windows could stare. I want to see this window. Is there one above it? Where's the other one?
Yes.
Is it above?
I think so.
People who don't like my books say I make things up. So I don't. Man, if you're paying attention, you don't have to make anything up in life. And this is one weird planet we live on, you know.
By day, I sat at the foot of the bed, straining.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. By day, I sat at the foot of the bed, straining. Foots of bed can strain? My foot of the bed doesn't do anything except just sits there. Anybody recognize those sentences, by the way? Well, that book is probably going to win a National Book Award.
When you think about all of the people that you spoke to on your original trip, how many of these were uncooperative and refused to self-disclose, and how many of them were genuinely interested in telling you about some specific item or subject?
You mean while we were talking the first time, while I was on the road, or later?
While you were on the road, considering the people that you spoke to, how many of them were unwilling to cooperate and didn't want to talk at all, and how many of them wanted to self-disclose and get something across to you?
There were a few who you know, kiss my butt, go ahead, boy, move on. Yes, there were a few of those. But they were in the minority, because when somebody comes in, this is particularly true, I think, in small-town America, when somebody comes in and wants to hear your story, and everybody else in town has heard your story about hunting the coyote or whatever it is. Oh, no, Henry, not that story again. But there's somebody there who hasn't heard it and looks like he's interested, and then if he pulls out a little notebook and starts writing things down, oh, he's taking this seriously. And the more common response is once they get going, and I see this in my other books too. It was really obvious out in Chase County in PrairyErth. People would say, "I got more time if you want." And I felt bad walking away from them. This really meant something to them. No, it's easier, at least in small town America, but with most people, it's easier to get people to talk if they think you're genuine and you're not a horse's ass or something. That helps. I may be a horse's ass, but I hide it when I'm interviewing people. Yeah. It's easier to do, I think, than people may imagine. I tell my students that, go out and talk. The last time I taught, 2005, Beloit College up in Wisconsin, fine little school. Campus is up on the hill, and you go down the hill, and there's the nice town. It's a nice town, Beloit's a neat place. And the second assignment, these were selected students, not by me, but by the English department. I was there just for one term. These were advanced students in a magazine writing course. The second assignment was to do a profile. That's fairly standard, nothing unusual about that. Write a profile. I said, but it has to be somebody you don't know. Okay. So, you get them off campus, go into town, meet someone. So I was reading their outlines before they to kind of approve them, and everybody looks pretty good. There's one girl in there from Chicago, and I read it, and I said, but this woman is the maid in your dorm, isn't she? Yes. I said, I don't know her. Well, I know you don't know her, but she's on campus. You have to get off campus. You have to go down the hill into town. Oh, well, I still don't know her. So it's about the same thing as going down. No, it's not the same thing. We had this discussion right in front of the whole class. And she was starting to get upset and starting to shake a little bit, and her eyes were shifting around. And I thought, this is really not going well. This is why I'm not teaching full time anymore. And she finally said, this assignment is just too creepy. Creepy. Talking to people is creepy? I'm the chief creep in the U.S. then. That's what I make my living. We're talking now. We're creeps in here. So I ran after the class ended, went to the department head, and I said, you're going to get a complaint. He did. She dropped. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there are two questions. One concerns the photographs in the book, which are masterful. Do you have any training in photography?
Yes, I have a degree in photojournalism from University of Missouri.
All right.
Yeah.
The other question you more or less explained, but I'm still wondering. It is the dialogues with individuals, and they are always individual, and I was wondering if you recorded everything, because it's so consistent within the person.
Mm-hmm. The only person that recorded two people, and one of them only in part. If you remember Arthur Obaki, the Seventh-day Adventist, a hitchhiker I picked up in Montana, photographed him, and there his long beard is blowing out in the wind. I recorded the biblical citations he was hitting me with time and time again in there, because I had that little microcassette recorder that I mentioned, and it was up in the front of the van. And he kept toying with it. I said, go ahead, try it out, Arthur. So when he would give a citation, I couldn't remember those. And I was driving, so I couldn't take notes. So he would speak them in there. The other person is, I met him in the Chiricahua Mountains in eastern Arizona, southeastern. I call him in the book Boss of the Plains. I thought he had a very sad life. And he was an angry man, an unpleasant man. I didn't like the guy. But his story I thought was pretty good. So he's about the only one who appears in Blue Highways at length. There's no photograph of him, and I never sent him a copy of what I was going to say about him. But everybody else, everyone whose photograph appears, saw ahead of time what I was writing about them, and they were free to make any kind of changes whatsoever that they wanted on the text. And they range from Kendrick Fritz, the Hopi, that I mentioned. He made no changes whatsoever, to Barbara Pierre, the black woman in St. Martinville, Louisiana, who completely rewrote what I sent her. And I thought, this is a disaster, because one, I needed more women in the book, and I certainly need more people of color. So this was terrible to lose a black woman, even more so because she, unlike some other people, was not afraid to speak out. And she was strengthening sentences that I said where I thought, maybe she's saying this a little strong and going to get herself in trouble with the white people in St. Martinville, so I don't want to cause a problem. She made them stronger. And I thought, this is great, but her style was not my style, let's put it that way. So my heart sank as I was turning page after page reading. It's got to the end, this is terrible, Barbara's gone. And there's a little pencil note at the end, a little pencil note, hard to read, and I looked at it. It said, this is my version of what we talked about. However, feel free to do whatever you want with it. So, so I kept it. She corrected some errors I'd made. And I met her a few years later and walked up to her apartment. She saw me coming. She came out. She was a big woman. Came out there, and I'm not a big man. She came out there and grabbed me and gave me a hug. So I think she was happy with the stories that came out. The other question, an extension of your question, is something. Gone, flew right out of my head. Those of you who are young in here, you're looking at your future. Can't remember what it was. I'll remember at 3 in the morning. If we all come back at 3 in the morning, I'll tell you what I was going to say. Yeah, sir.
Good evening. I want to briefly thank you for Blue Highways. I read it in 1987. I was going through a marital breakup at the time, and it was very therapeutic, and I want to thank you for that. My question has to do with your book, Here, There, Elsewhere. Were there more differences or more parallels between the cultures as in your accounts, and as you got to know people, there was a more international flavor to it? Were there more differences, or were there more similarities between cultures and between people?
Between what?
Between cultures and between the different cultures.
Yeah, I don't think, if I understand your question, I don't think I do so well talking with people outside the U.S.
Okay, here, there, elsewhere. The book Here, There, and Elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were you were over in Italy, and you were in Japan and
New Zealand, England. Yeah.
England. Yeah, I just wondered how you did with different cultures.
Well, it's hard because I don't understand a lot of basic things. Even in England, I still don't quite understand the school system, the way it works. So they would use terms, public school, and I thought, that doesn't mean what it means with us, and things like that happen. So my ignorance is a handicap. So I feel I'm never working so well. Plus, there's a lot of I don't understand tones of voice overseas in England. I don't know what certain expressions, facial expressions, mean. So I don't interpret so well. Whereas if I'm talking to Kansas Cityans, I understand your speech, and I know from slight changes in your speech a lot about some things about you, and I understand if you do this or that, what that means. We're not even going to talk about that. But if I go to New York and I start losing that. This guy is talking awfully loud in my ear. Well, it seems like rude to me, to probably all of us in here, but in New York it's something else. Shouting there is okay. Shouting to most of us, we grew up here, that's rude. You don't shout unless you are angry, but you can shout in New York and not be angry at all. So I'm missing out on things. Even if I speak the language, or they do, New Zealand, for example. God, New Zealand was dull. Topographically, beautiful country, oh my, but I never got in so many boring conversations. Whoa. It's like going to Canada. No, I'm kidding.
I did enjoy the book very, very much.
Thank you.
I want to preface this by saying I don't doubt the veracity of anything you say in your books, and I know for a fact that I'm pretty sure for a fact that the statement that you made in River Horse is I think is actually possible, but I was wondering if it was an actual true thing, or if it was just literary license when you say, I hit many a backyard home run from Missouri into Kansas.
No, because it's only 50, 100, only about 120 feet from my parents' backyard to state line. They lived on Mercer out south.
Oh, so you actually hit it over the road state line?
Yeah. That's how I knew it was a state line.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I knew that was Kansas over there. No. George Brett never did that. I don't think he did.
And one other quick question too is: are there any five calendar cafes left in America anymore?
The calendar system, I wish I could have patented that, because that's become maybe the most well-known thing of all my writing. At the time, it was worth something because it worked. But what happened, first of all, I think, is that banks and insurance companies and auto repair shops, who are the big ones who would print those calendars, don't do that anymore. So the calendars aren't there. And if they did, it looks so hokey that people now don't want to look so small town. And thirdly, here we go again. People found out, I let the cat out of the bag. So people started putting more calendars up on their wall. In little old Columbia, in Boone County, I went south of town within a year after Blue Highways came out, and the woman, I can't think of her name, It's off Highway 63, halfway to Jeff City. She had a good little restaurant there. She had 3 out visible in the audience, and then I was going to buy a Hamilton Beach milkshake maker from her because she was about ready to change hands. So I went back in her kitchen to look at it, and she had 4 more calendars in the kitchen. So that was a 7-calendar cafe, and I thought I never figured out whether you count calendars in kitchens. Maybe I should have been going into the kitchens on this trip too. No, it doesn't work anymore. Yeah.
In PrairyErth, you obviously had an affection for not only Chase County, but the Flint Hills. In Blue Highways, did you ever find another place like that, or are there other places like that in the United States?
You mean that I hold in special affection?
Yeah, you know, the Flint Hills and Chase County are somewhat unique in the United States. Did you ever, in Blue Highways, did you ever visit another area?
Oh my, yes, yeah, numerous areas. You want me to name some now, probably, but the first one that pops up into my mind is the Boundary Waters up in Minnesota, which I write about in Here, There, Elsewhere, I think. Is Roads to Quoz? Oh, well, anyway. My books, they're really, in my mind, they're kind of one book. They're not by the same man, because who's the same man year after year, but the memory fuses. Are you guys giving us the sign? We got people waiting in line. I hate to cut them. Oh, that's it. Okay. All right. Good.
I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on when Blue Highways first came out, the impression that people understood America a little better, or, you know, what the press was saying, or reviews that kind of gave that impression or the feeling that that's what you had hit upon, of just a little bit more details as far as what that was that is being said, or what people's impressions were?
The trip was in '78. The book came out in January of 1983. And we were at a bad time in our history. If you remember, the captives that the Iranians had, that President Carter attempted to free, and that whole attempt to free them went bad. We were feeling, one, we were angry, but we also were embarrassed. And the economy was not so good. There were a lot of things going on there. There was still a lot of serious hangover from the Vietnam protests. People were hostile to Richard Nixon. They weren't too happy about Lyndon Johnson. They weren't too happy about Carter. I mean, it goes right down the line. Doesn't Richard Nixon seem like a pretty good Republican now compared to what you see? And if you're a Republican, don't take offense. I mean, the man signed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and I'm forgetting something. Environmentally, he showed up some Democrats. Anyway, it was a time, and Blue Highways came out, and I think, I have this according to the New York Times, a review that really helped get the book rolling. Anatole Boryard said, it gives us a chance to hold our head up again. Well, I didn't have my head down, and I'm sure a lot of you didn't, but that sense, I think, helped. Plus, people, this is flyover country, right? We hear that phrase. Doesn't it annoy you? And where I went was even more flyover country, but people were realizing that there are human beings who are worth something in flyover country, and even more so. PrairyErth is very much about that. I asked a woman one time, so when I was getting ready to write PrairyErth and trying to test whether this was a good idea or not, I said, she was not from Kansas. I said, what do you know about Kansas? She was from the East. She said, well, let's see, I know that it's flat, and it's treeless, and it takes up 2 pages in the Rand McNally. So, well, one of those things is true, and other people say, well, let's see what I know. Oh, yeah, In Cold Blood, wasn't that in Kansas? Yeah, and Dorothy? Isn't Dorothy? Wasn't she Kansas? So one's a myth, one's a nightmare. I mean, this is a natural to write about. People, and I'm a Missourian, man. I'm a Missouri Tiger. And for me to write about Kansas, how dare you? But Kansans have been great supporters of that book. I mean, it should, because it's a love song to the Flint Hills. And how many of you have seen the Flint Hills? I'm just curious. Oh my God. Oh Lord. Okay. Well, you know what we're talking. My. I won't ever forget those hands. I'll dream about your hands tonight. How many of you have read all my books?
Good evening, sir. For those of us, forgive us for those of us who have not read Revisited.
Can you hear her back there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
For those of us who have not read Revisited, what do you think would be the differences from then to today? Cultural disparities?
What was the last thing you said?
Like when you were in Selma, Alabama, and you interviewed those two young men, and they were telling you about all the problems that the African American culture encountered in the South. And then when you were in Arizona and you encountered the snubbing from the Indians. So what do you think would be the differences from then to today?
Ed's really the one to answer that question because he's retraced all 13,000 miles. Ed, do you want to? You'll have to come up, I think.
Who's this?
I think my guess is before Ed speaks is that I would see, and I clearly would have said this probably a few years ago. I would think we would have seen greater racial tolerance, and I really thought that's what's happening in this country until President Obama was elected. And then suddenly all of these crypto racists are coming out, and they hate Obama because he's half white. I mean half black. So I thought we're doing well, and we're improving. We're going to make it. Yes, and then bang, this setback. So I don't know, but Ed, what did you see, Ed?
Well, in Selma, it was interesting. The young man that Heat Moon interviewed in depth, who had been in the Air Force, and said, "You've got to see the other. You've got to cross over that bridge to see what's on the other side." He did go on to get his college degree. He did try to help youth and mentor youth, particularly through a young baseball league. Unfortunately, he died of an aneurysm at about age 42. So I think that young man proved that things were changing. And of course, a year after I went through there was when Barack Obama declared his candidacy for the presidency. So certainly things had changed in Selma. I think, as Will's pointed out, the fact that we've had a black president has brought out a lot of prejudice that was right below the surface that we've still got to work with. I couldn't probably tell you as much about the second question was regarding the Indian reservation.
He went to a couple of bars and they snubbed him.
Yeah.
And it was one town. One was a white bar. The other bar was the local Indians. And you went to that bar and they wouldn't listen to you.
Yeah, I'm not clicking on that one.
Yeah. It was in Arizona, and there were about 2 bars in town. And
New Mexico.
Was it New Mexico?
That was not Indian. That was Hispanic.
Okay.
Yeah. No. The men in that pool hall.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't speak the language very well, so that didn't help any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just kind of ignored you.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. I don't know that I can say anything more than I can tell you that bar is no longer open. Q and I went by there last year. I wanted to go in and look in, but the building's there, but it's closed up.
Hey, just one last question, and that is, I heard a rumor tonight that this trip, your original journey, may have started on 69th Street in 1953 when you were cutting the grass. Sorry. It's an inside joke, sorry.
I cut the grass. This is Crosby Kemper, and I think all the library people here know you.
He cut my parents' grass when I was 2 years old. I found that out tonight. Anyway.
I had a friend of mine named Charles Douglas, who lived on Flora Avenue with me, 74th and Flora, had a motorbike, and it was a bicycle with a motor on it. And I would borrow his motorbike and put my lawnmower behind it and tow it from 74th and Flora over to 69th off of Ward Parkway and cut 2 lawns over there, including Crosby's father, our Crosby Kemper. his father lived there with your mother, Cindy. And I cut their hose in half one day because I thought it was low enough in the grass I could get the mower over, and it didn't make it. And certainly the Kemper name was known in Kansas City, but not as well then as it would be with your father and yourself later. So here I connect with the great banking firm in Columbia by cutting the man's hose in half. People say I make things up. That's what I mean. If you're paying attention, this is a weird planet.
Well, on that extraordinary note, I think we'll end tonight. And thank you so much, William Least Heat Moon.
Thank you.